You are now in the Backcourt, a Brooklyn Nets podcast presented by Ticketmaster, recording episode 10 on New Year's Eve. You will be listening to this in 2025. Me, Lucas Kaplan of NetsDaily, of Nets Film Focus, and Sarah Kustok, color commentator for Yes Network, calls many a Nets games, many other games. We will be breaking that down, all of your usual Nets content. But first, before we bring in Sarah, we're just going to wrap up the nuts and bolts of a trade the Brooklyn Nets made on Sunday afternoon. The team sent Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton to the Los Angeles Lakers. In return, they got Maxwell Lewis, a young player from Pepperdine University, 22 years old. They received D'Angelo Russell, a one-time Net who is now a two-time Net, been around the league since his first tenure here, a Warrior, a Timberwolf, a Laker, has a ton of playoff experience now, got a beard on his face. It's been a minute, I should say, but Nets fans certainly remember his first tenure very positively. I know I have some special memories of his time here, which Sarah and I will get into. The Nets also received 3 second-round picks from the Lakers, 2027, 2030, 2031. And really that's, a lot of what this trade is about. They continue to expand their stash of draft capital. I believe now they have 15 first-rounders and 16, potentially 17 second-rounders, depending on a swap or two. It is the fattest draft stash in the league, building towards the future, building towards sustainable success, as general manager Sean Marks likes to call it. It's a very understandable trade. These things go down quite often. Alas, part of the business is it is a little tough to say goodbye to Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton, as it is, with any players that give their all to Brooklyn. Dorian Finney-Smith was a guy who only spent just under 2 years in Brooklyn, was acquired at the 2023 trade deadline, but really made an impression in his time here. He, was the 3-and-D guy that he was as advertised to be, but, he even did a little bit more than that in Brooklyn. There were times when we highlighted on this podcast, he was playing center for them, playing drop coverage, picking and popping from three, guarding, whoever his coaches asked him to every night. Personally, he was a joy to talk to, always in a good mood, joking around, smile on his face. If you want to really catch up on the full story of Dodo, from Portsmouth to Brooklyn, is an excellent, documentary, not a short, but, 30, 40-minute documentary on Doe's journey from his hometown in Virginia to the NBA. It was great. Brooklyn Nets content team, shout out to them. If you want to recap the Dodo experience. And Shake Milton, who was not here for quite as long, only played, for 2-3 months as a Net, had some great moments, including leading, that fourth quarter comeback against the Milwaukee Bucks just a week ago. Alas, the NBA, trades happen. Guys come, guys leave. Guys come back for a second time. Now with D'Angelo Russell, we'll see what Maxwell Lewis has to offer. His NBA career has barely gotten off the ground yet. Very young guy. So that ties a bow on that. And now Sarah Kustok and I will look forward, see what the next few weeks, months, the return of D'Angelo Russell may bring to the Brooklyn Nets. So thank you guys for listening. Happy New Year's. And now, as promised, we will bring in star color commentator for Yes Network, Sarah Kustok. Sarah, how are we doing today? We're recording on New Year's Eve.
We
Tomorrow,
are.
Yeah, it'll be New Year's Day 2025 when Nets fans are listening to this.
I can't believe
how
it.
Are we?
I am fantastic. I can't believe we are heading into year 2025. But no, I'm thrilled. I'm excited. I am someone who takes the approach of like living every day like a holiday and, showing up the way you want to show up on New Year's or resolution base as well. So I'm not a huge New Year's person, but I'm down with it. I think it's great.
Okay, for someone who works as often as you do, I'm frankly shocked to hear you say that you treat every day like a holiday, but we must have
Well, maybe not
different
a holiday. Maybe
ideas.
celebrate. Maybe that's not the way to put it. Correct.
But
Maybe every day is, or vice versa, that there are really no holidays, and we make those
ah,
celebrations when we have time, in
there
the
are
context of our schedules.
there are many definitions of optimism, and apparently holiday. So I love to hear it. Obviously, I just talked about the trade the Nets made on Sunday, saying goodbye to Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton, saying hello to an old friend, and in D'Angelo Russell and Maxwell Lewis. So that's a good starting point. We can actually push the next net where we talk about Nets we want to see, get their game off, improve whatever it may be in the next week. We can start there, push it up to the beginning of the show. What Nets have to, step up now with the absence of Dorian and Shake? Who are you looking for to kind of fill that void?
I think there's a handful that we've already seen. We've obviously discussed this at length. So I would point to a collective whole. Sometimes I think when players move on or are lost, or you're playing without players, even injury, you name it, it is a collective push to have to fill those gaps, in particular when people and players touch on different areas of a group. And so I think that leadership role should be shared and is shared. I think there'll be a heavy reliance on some of the more veteran players like a Cam Johnson, who we've seen him be that through the entirety of the season, but also a Nick Claxton. Even a Jordi Fernandez was talking in his press conference after the Orlando loss about the adults. And I think he said, correct me if I'm wrong, the 23-year-olds and over, or 24 and
Hmm.
over,
Hmm.
but a Jalen Wilson type, you kind of go down the list of players who you would anticipate have the maturity and have the ability to continue to lead by example, also with their voices, and also just playing the way that you want to see on both sides of the floor. And as we know, it's not always about the makes and misses of shots. It's not always about being perfect, but it's about making sure you're bringing the requisite sense of urgency, sense of purpose on each and every possession. I think that's a big part of what you'll look for as the season continues. But I do think if you're pointing to one that I'm excited to watch and how he really gathers things, it would be Nick Claxton.
Okay, that's an interesting point of reference, just because Nick doesn't play either of those positions, if you want to think about that. But I do like that you went with almost the more intangibles, the leadership qualities, because clearly that's what head coach Jordi Fernandez has prioritized in a lot of his decision making. I think bringing that energy, that leadership, that fight is, why a guy like Keon Johnson has jumped into the starting lineup despite the shot not going in as frequently from 3-point land as it did when he was coming off the bench. So despite all that, that dip in percentages, he's starting because you can see he's bringing that energy every night, and that seems to be what Jordy, really prioritizes, and as he should, in a year when it's about finding the next Nets, setting a culture. I think that makes a lot of sense. What does that look like for you from everybody, but also just from Nick? There's some specific areas you want to see in the next week or so.
I think to me, it's more of a mentality, and you pointed to it. Even though players, you're not a one for one in terms of positions. I think now you look at the league across the board, and it is very positionless. And a
Yeah.
lot of how teams play, we even saw this in the shift of the way this team played with Dennis Schroeder running the show as opposed to Ben Simmons. And I would point to Ben as being another one of those leadership pushers in how you're playing. But the style may change a little bit in the concepts, the philosophy, the foundation does not, but I think just in terms of the way in which you're playing, and it also may shift as well, depending what things look like with D'Angelo Russell. And we saw the team get away more so from the heavy pick and roll when Schroeder left, and a lot more DHOs, a lot more off ball movement, a lot more actions and screening off
Hmm.
the ball. Well, D'Angelo Russell is a pick and roll player, and so that's going to be a major part of that and how he'll be able to play on and off the ball. So you can kind of go down the list of certain characteristics, but that's where I think Nick is a player who's spoken very honestly, which you appreciate, and I think he always has, about how he's evaluated what he's done in his performance to this point in a season. But more of it for Nick, and sometimes it's just hard. It's hard for a player who is a five, who is a center. You're not handling the ball a ton in the same type of way, but we've seen the offense be able to be initiated through him more. And I think for him, a lot of it too is just his ability to rip a rebound and push and how
Hmm.
he uses the versatility of his skills. But where I care most about is on the defensive side of things. And that's where when you lose a player like Dorian Finney-Smith, you need to fortify things to me at that end of the floor first. And Nick is a player who's talked about wanting to be not only in the discussion, but be defensive player of the year. Well, where does that start and what does that look like? And how are you not only one of those players who has switchability and really relishes and being able to guard multiple positions and protect the rim as well? But how does that look like in your communication with your teammates? How does that look when you are talking about trying to truly anchor a defense? And that's what I'm excited to see because I think he has it in him. It's just about continuing to take those steps, and this may provide the opportunity and maybe some of the void that he can now fill in that type of role.
Definitely. And you trust Nick to do it just because you mentioned him speaking very honestly about his performance. He said he wasn't totally, satisfied with how his game has gone this year. But again, this is a guy who's transformed from second round draft pick into, $100 million contract worthy player in the span of 5, 6 years, still in his mid to early 20s. So if, you trust anyone on this Nets roster, he's a veteran by now, which is crazy to say as someone, who's been following his whole career. But he is definitely the linchpin of their defense. I look at a guy like Noah Clowney, who I'm really excited to talk about. Obviously with Shake's departure, that's probably more ball handling reps for Keon Johnson. I know Cam Thomas has returned, and we'll touch on that, more decision making for him. But Noah Clowney, who I don't want to speculate too much, might get some starts at the 4 next to Nick now in Dorian's absence. Maybe comes off the bench, who knows? But fills a lot of the same spaces on the court, just in terms of making rotations at the rim, behind Nick Claxton, spotting up from 3. And he's been on fire for a couple of weeks now from
Yeah, he
3.
has.
Had some of his highest scoring games of his career. And I'm really excited about his development. And I think the 3-point shooting is not just the main reason, or maybe the main thing on the box score that you look at and say, oh, wow, his production's taken a leap. But to me, it seems like that's come along with just, one of those classic second year stories where he just seems a little bit more comfortable in his role as a true full-time NBA player. He still hasn't really played a season's worth of games yet, because if you recall, all those great things he did in his rookie season came in March and April. So he's not even like a year into being a full-time NBA player. Have you seen him get, aside from the three-point shot, a little more at ease, comfortable, aware on the court?
I think he has. I would also say for as well as he's shooting the three-pointer, and I know he's got a green light as do the rest of the team with how Jordi Fernandez wants them to play. To me, his despite still shooting at a high volume of 3, his shot selection has improved even over the small sample size in the course of the start of this year. I feel like, it's still a quick trigger, but it is a more patient one and one that is surveying the floor more on the offensive side. I think too, just his continued ability to grow in when you run off the 3-point line, because it is different too when you got such a high release point and you're a taller player. You can probably get off a lot of shots that others could not, but still getting to the basket, penetrating the paint, working that drive and kick game. But defensively, I think that is a major part of remembering that he's 20 years old. And so picking up NBA style defenses, how you're able to continue to adapt to seeing different players and learning tendencies and nuance, the film study, and what that looks like game by game, team by team. And the more then you're seeing teams, what I love to see is, okay, now you've seen this team. We'll look ahead to this week. But for example, Milwaukee multiple times. Well, how does that change in what you understand? And every team is going to approach things different, or just potentially have a different look in how they're going to play you game by game, matchup by matchup, and who is playing based on personnel. But I think those are the small tweaks, and continuing to try and lessen some of those breakdowns defensively, or mental mistakes, or lapses, or lack of understanding of where you're supposed to be. And I do think over the course of, and sometimes that does come with just things slowing down a little bit because you mentally have a better understanding. And I think we have seen that from him, but there's still, I mean, the sky's the limit. The amount that he has to grow and to improve. You want to talk about a player that you can get excited about? He absolutely is one of those.
I've loved his development this season just because it is not always linear. Like he had a really strong start end to the season last year, and then he comes into this year and he's maybe not playing as many minutes, and the shot maybe isn't going in quite as much. But since we recorded last, took a little holiday break for one episode. They played 6 games. He scored double digits in 5 of 6 games, and he's made a ton of defensive plays.
Yes.
I have to put together a compilation of him. I don't know if this is something you've noticed, but as like the transition defender, backpedaling, contesting at the rim, I feel like he's made a bunch of plays in those 2-on-1, one-on-one open court situations. And like I said, double digit scoring 5 of the last 6 games. I really think he is the type of athlete that has really special and intriguing, and probably why the Nets drafted him. Movement skills at 6'10 with super long arms, like wiry but can fit through small spaces. He's had a ton of really cool, moves to the basket, attacking closeouts last season, especially in the G League. And now, what I really like about him taking a lot of threes, taking a lot of shots, is that he's going to be drawing these closeouts and having hopefully more opportunities to put the ball on the deck and make decisions. He had a really cool pass to Nick Claxton off a drive in Milwaukee that led to a dunk. But right now, he's above 39% from three this season on like 13 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. For some context, that is like the career numbers of like Malik Beasley,
Yeah.
more volume and efficiency than Tim Hardaway Jr. I don't know why. I guess I'm focusing on the Pistons, but just for context, I know it's a small sample size. Those are like capital S shooter numbers. Fly out, get him, run him off the line. And so I think if those numbers even close to continue, teams are going to have to do that, and then you're going to see a little bit more of his game develop. But I do like that I can kind of see Jordy Fernandez and the staff building his game out piece by piece. Okay, you're going to have to draw a lot of closeouts because you have these cool movement skills and you can put it on the floor and evade people. Now you're going to be drawing those closeouts. So I'm super excited to watch him the rest of the season, maybe get a little more minutes and opportunity, in Dorian's place. But that's the guy I'm looking at. And I guess now just to take it to the big picture, I did mention the Nets have played 6 games since Sarah and I last recorded. Ton of stuff happened aside from the trade. Cam Thomas returned. The Nets won 2 of those games, and it seemed like they were headed for a win against the Orlando Magic, in which they really played well for 3 quarters and blew a late lead. Cam Thomas game-winning attempt rimmed off back rim. But I guess that's a good place to start. What have you seen from the Nets offense when it's been clicking? And what have you seen from the Nets offense when it maybe hasn't been? Because that was really, they only scored 4 points in the last 7 minutes of that Orlando game. And then maybe as a bonus question, how does the return of Cam Thomas, who looked pretty good in that Magic game, maybe alleviate some of this stuff?
Let's start with the offense. In a couple disclaimers, which, I know are not excuses, and Jordy Fernandez certainly wasn't taking them post game. But despite all the injuries that they have endured in the Orlando Magic, they are one of the top defenses and have been in the league under Jamal Mosley. How they've played, just the disposition of this group based on their personnel. So they do have stretches where they can stagnate an offense, and Mosley in particular, give him a ton of credit of understanding how as the course of a game continues on. So we see that. We have seen that Orlando Magic team as of late. Again, regardless of the personnel that has been available to them, have some huge comebacks. So all of those things are characteristic. One, you got to give some credit to the Magic. On the flip side of things, Absolutely for the Nets. And you can't blow a lead like that. That's certainly something that you need to find ways to work through not making shots. And I think that'll be a growth point of this group of how are you playing and what are you doing when shots are not going down. And I think we've seen ebbs and flows of that through this season of still getting stops at the other end. But the one thing about missing shots is that it very much stresses your defense and it stresses your transition defense. No question, as you know, as we all know, as all fans of basketball know, it's not just about the points that you're getting when shots go in. It goes hand in hand in allowing a team to get out and run and be more fluid into their offense. It's the same reason the Nets always care about getting stops at the defensive end. And I think it's just in both ways, the transition defense improving in that area, the communication, all of those things. And again, it's different when you're playing with different players. You have new players in, and whether it's the loss of players or the re-addition of Cam Thomas, you name it. Um, but also just not allowing that to mentally affect you at the other end of the floor. And that's this thing that's easier said than done. But I do think so much changes in their game when their 3-point shots are not falling, and, Lucas, that's where I think you try to mitigate it in ways of all those for as much as we've been raving about the shooting of Noah Clowney or for others, and that's why I think we often point to Cam Johnson with his understanding of a veteran if he's still gonna take those shots, you're still taking if you're
Hmm.
shooters
Hmm.
and everyone's shooters, you're gonna be taking good looks, but there may be an instance that you feel, "You know what? I've missed a couple three-point shots. I wanna try and drive, get to the basket, see one go through, or work my mid-range game, or try and get myself to the line to get things going a little bit," and I think the group can do that in a more improved way as a whole. And a
Definitely.
lot
I
of
think
that is what yeah, go yeah, I mean, but I think that like, that to me is the one thing that always stands out, when they go through stretches where shots aren't falling, and by nature, then the offense becomes a little bit more standing around or a little bit more quick shoot.
you have to, win the 3-point battle in today's NBA. Really, it's just a simple math game, and they are good shots for the Nets, who have more than capable shooters, as we saw in the first part of the year. But there is a difference between kind of, understanding the assignment, so to speak, and getting those shots up as the coaching staff tells you to do, and then that sort of veteran, very learned experience of, okay, let me maybe be a little more aggressive in attacking this closeout and draw a foul and get to the rim. And knowing, when the game situation and when the game flow and the momentum calls for that is not something that players walk into the NBA with, because you're trying to follow the assignment. You're trying to do what the coach tells you,
Yep.
and you're trying to get up to threes. And frankly, when the Nets have gotten up to threes, it's worked. So why
Yes.
would you go away from that? But that kind of veteran understanding of, okay, we need to settle this down right now, just on this possession or two, is a tough skill to master when things are happening so fast. And that's, something that the Nets have to learn as a young team in year one of this thing with a new coach. However, there have been improvements in games. It's not like they lost every game since the last time we potted. For example, the fouling, the physical, how to be physical without fouling, that was a huge point, of emphasis in the first part of the year. Over the last 2 weeks, the Nets are third in offensive rebounding per cleaning the glass. They are league average in getting to the line on offense, and then they are above average on defensively rebounding and above average in preventing free throws. So over the last 2 weeks, all the numbers indicate that they've been a very physical team and they've won the foul battle. And that was not at all the case a month ago. And frankly, it was costing them some games. So these improvements don't always, like I said, they're not linear. They're going to improve in some areas and then fall off in another area. But to me, the defense, the physicality, those have been some positives over the last 2 weeks. And it's just about mastering those little, you know, rhythmic game flow, situations that aren't, kind of the basics, going above and beyond. And that's probably why, you opened with all this leadership talk in absence of Dorian Finney-Smith. To bring it full circle, Jordy Fernandez talked about needing adults in the room, needing the guys that are over 23 to lead them in these situations. And, it's like the skill of winning is kind of how I look at it.
You nailed it, all of it, and all of that, and thank you for tying it in a bow. And it is to just having players that can settle everyone down. But the last thing I'll say, which I thought was great points in the numbers, like offensive rebounding, if you're missing shots, it presents you
Hmm.
more opportunity. And I know there's a
Right.
balance between getting back in transition defense and attacking the rim, but we've seen the Nets be really good at that. And sometimes it's just the timeliness of coming up with a loose ball, the timeliness of coming away with a deflection and getting a really a tough, disjointed offensive possession for your opponent that feels like it shifts the momentum. And there is no question that basketball, it's a momentum game, it's a feel game, it's an energy game. And when you make plays or have plays that sometimes suck some of the life out of a team, and you see it on both sides, that isn't just shot making. That's a lot of
Mhm.
little things that become the big things.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not, again, not like the Nets haven't done it. I think that game in Milwaukee where they pulled out a
Yeah.
tough, close win where the lead shrunk and then they built it back up and then they had to
Yes.
come back against a veteran team was super impressive. And, they didn't have Dorian Finney-Smith in that one. And that is going to be kind of the model. It's not going to be every night, but, they can do it. They've shown they can do it. It'll happen again.
Lucas, the last thing I'll say on that, which you're correct, like, and I am such a big believer in this, in the NBA, in anything you're doing, it is all about learned experiences. So,
Hmm.
what
Of course.
habits are you creating now that it may end up in a loss or it may end up in a botch, whatever it is, but can you make that be better for you next time? And that's where I think the focus has got to be, just both individually but collectively with this group.
Yeah, and even a guy like Cam Thomas who did have a great debut, or not a debut, but a return to action. Cam probably had a better first half. Definitely had a better first half shooting the ball than he did in the second half. Maybe the legs went a little bit. I also thought his decision making was a little crisper in the first half. I think it's easy. I think he had 5 assists in the first half and maybe 1 assist in the second half. But in general, Orlando was a little bit more aggressive with him in the second half, and it maybe took him a minute to readjust. I think learned experiences, even for guys that have kind of gone through it now. Not that Cam Thomas is a super veteran, but he's had some defensive attention on him for a while. He's a guy I looked at to steady the offense. He made the 1 assist he did have in the second half was a fantastic look ahead, get ahead pass in transition that led to a layup. For a team that needs to be better in transition offense, that was a great sign. So, in that department, CT is definitely a guy that is going to have a lot on his plate, and I'm excited to watch him maybe try to bring some, not just scoring as we know he can do, but veteran leadership and playmaking in certain spots and adjusting to coverages. And he's going to have to do it, for this offense to keep up for the next, week or so. So he could also be a next net that we're watching. But now I want to bring it all the way back to the positives, what we saw in the last 2 weeks. We have a big sample size. Going to do Brooklyn's finest, guys that we want to
Woo!
shout out for their efforts. Who are you giving your Brooklyn's finest award to over these last 2 weeks? Who's really impressed you?
I'll be brief since we've already touched on him quite a bit, but my Brooklyn's finest was Noah Clowney.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just think how he's played offensively, the improvements he's shown defensively, the growth of where he's been. I just think he's someone to keep an eye on, and maybe in terms of who's been the best. Well, probably across the board, everyone has made different contributions, but to me, there, as we have discussed at length already, there's been a very visible difference in how you continue to see him play, the comfort that he has. So he was the guy that I had on my mind in terms of Brooklyn's finest over the course of the past little bit.
Yeah, I think I have said all I need to about Noah Clowney on this
Yeah.
episode, but no doubt he'll give us more in the future. I could have gone a couple ways here. I want to give a quick shout out to Ben Simmons, who we talked about, needing to get downhill more, needing to exert a little bit more force at the rim, and I really think he has over the past 2 weeks. And you've seen the benefits for Brooklyn's offense. Keon Johnson, same thing, even though he hasn't shot the ball as well. He's had some really nice plays. But I will go again, an opportunity to talk about Cam Johnson.
Oh, yeah, you got to.
How can you not? He just continues to get better and respond to increased defensive attention and challenges. and then he conquers them or has great games against them. And, that constitutes progress. Against the Utah Jazz, it was probably one of his worst games of the season a couple weeks ago. They threw 2 on the ball at him every possession. He had a few turnovers. He didn't shoot well. He didn't really get to his spots. And that's understandable. We talked about this with Cam Thomas last season when teams started trapping and doubling him. He talked about the adjustment period. Very understandable stuff. The Bucks come out like the next 2 games later on the road, and they double him all game. They trap him. And Cam Johnson has a few turnovers, but it was just a completely different feel and comfort level navigating those situations. And he ends up scoring 29 points on 8 of 13 shooting in a win where he played 35 minutes. He shot 4 of 6 from 3, got to the line 9 times. And that, if there's one stretch, couple of games that exemplify his growth and his excellence this season, it would be those 2 games for me. I think we can kind of agree like that. We know he can shoot, right? We know he's going to be about the right things. We know he's going to be in the right spots on defense. We know he's going to work his butt off. But getting better constantly, getting 1% better, as Jordy Fernandez likes to say, as defenses continue to throw out new challenges to him, that's what's been most impressive, because I knew all that other stuff about Cam Johnson. I didn't really know that he would respond like this to a larger role on offense.
I'm running out of things to say to describe how impressed I am with Cam Johnson. He's been to me, the mark of really great players is consistency. His level of consistency has been extraordinary. Clutch plays, you see it on both ends. You see in different looks, different things, a different level of usage than he has in his career. And even if there are adjustments that need to be made, then he does it and keeps going. I think he's got a level of toughness that you think about him as a shooter, obviously, but there is a level of toughness that has been evident. And more than anything, I think you need a leader and a individual, a profession. He's a pro's pro. And so
Mhm.
I think you need that on a team to help. We're talking about all these young players and Noah Clowney, Jalen Wilson, even those like a Keon Johnson or those who are getting acclimated to the league. To me, he's someone that you watch on a daily basis and say, okay, what has he done through his career? How has he handled this? How has he handled certain
Mhm.
things? And so I think his presence in the locker room, on the court, off the court, all that stuff. Yeah, it's. I think you could pick him for Brooklyn's finest. Probably every
Mhm.
week we do that. But to your point, the different things we're continuing to see on a week by week basis is something that's very fun in the evolution of someone's career that's only 28 years old.
Yep.
Like it feels like he's been around a while, but he's still a young. We keep looking at him as a veteran player. He's still a young player and still entering the prime of what he's going to become.
And he's basically the best shooter, the best ball handler, the best passer that he's ever been in his career. I
Yeah.
think that stuff is pretty inarguable. Maybe the shooting, who knows, sample sizes, whatever. But the guy's been awesome, and we could do another hour just on the skills that he's gotten better at. But too
And
long
and
don't
your
read.
and
And
your
my facial
lookalike
hair,
facial hair that you're trying to, now that I know the reasoning behind it.
well, not quite. It
Lucas, I
doesn't
dig it.
connect.
I dig it. I would do the same. I tried to look like Ian Eagle when I can, and
Mm.
it just doesn't roll. My
Well, you
hair
guys
isn't.
both have the
My hair is
clean
not as
shaven.
controlled that way. No, my
Ah,
hair's not. I wear glasses now every now and again just to try and look alike.
few are as controlled under pressure as Iron Eagle. We could all strive to be more composed. Yeah, no, Cam Johnson, facial hair, he's having a career year. Maybe try to change, try to
Lucas,
improve my luck
Lucas, you're having a
for
career here too.
2025.
We
Yeah,
love it.
it doesn't connect yet. I still got a ways to go, but that I'm very glad to move on from that. Thank you for the compliment and wrap up with our last trivia of 2024.
Woo! What you got? What you got?
It's not quite trivia because there's no wrong answer, but in the
I
spirit
like
of
it.
looking back,
Yes, this is my favorite type of trivia.
we're looking back at the year behind us. D'Angelo Russell's returning to Brooklyn. So I just want to ask, what was your favorite moment from the first ride, from the first go round for D'Angelo Russell in Brooklyn? What do you remember? Game, play, skill, interaction?
My
when you think of D'Angelo Russell, what comes to
there's
mind?
obviously a lot. Like the thing I will never forget is when we were at Indiana and that group clinched the playoffs.
Yep.
And I remember why I don't know who was getting showered with water on the court and who was the water pourer between him and Karis LeVert, Joe Harris, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jared Allen. The list goes on. That was a beloved team for Brooklyn Nets fans for reasons in how they came together and exceeded a lot of expectations based on their togetherness. And he was a major part of that. We remember his All-Star season, but that is a indelible memory in my mind of sitting there at the scores table calling the game with Ian and watching that moment because you thought it was going to happen. I don't know. You may remember how many games, 4 or 5 games
Yeah.
left in the season. They needed one win. But there was something about that exact moment when the game ended that to me was the essence of sports and of team and of how you can the collective parts are greater. What's the term? The
The
yeah.
sum
The
is
parts are
greater, the parts greater
yeah.
than the whole. That
Um,
team was that, personified. Yeah, that was my freshman year of college. I remember watching that Indiana game in the student lounge. By that time, later in the year, I'd made some friends. I was like, we're watching the Brooklyn Nets clinch a playoff spot. No ifs,
You
ands, or
said
buts.
later that took a whole year to make friends?
Well,
Lucas.
not a
I'm
whole
teasing.
year. It
I'm
was only
teasing.
March.
I'm giving you a hard time.
But now you really deserve to give me a hard time because I remember the Sacramento Kings comeback, of course,
Oh, yes.
in
That
which I was
oh,
watching that alone in my dorm room. So, that was a little
better
earlier in
off,
the year.
better off, better off. Ryan Rucco had such a presence through the TV, and he
Hmm.
wouldn't sit down for the second half of the game or the whole fourth quarter. So I feel like it was probably better off you were watching that one alone.
Good to know Ryan and I were watching the game in the exact sort of way because, I didn't turn it off. I don't know, maybe I'm sure I had some homework to do. I kind of kept it on in a background tab when they were down 25 and they were down 20. And I was like, okay. And then they were down 15, so on. And I remember every bucket from that. I remember, obviously, the game winning layup from Rondé Hollis Jefferson and the 3 from Jared Dudley on the trail. But I remember more than everything a bunch of looping, arcing D'Angelo Russell swishes from 3 that won them that game. And I'm excited those shots are back in Brooklyn. Hopefully next week we're going to have a lot to talk about in terms of what he does on the court. But a pretty cool full circle moment for him, for Brooklyn Nets fans that remember that team so especially well. And what else would you like to say to the people to wrap up? That's about it from us. What are we looking forward to in 2025? How are we feeling?
I think just all things, hope and enthusiasm for what can come. And I think no one would have expected some of the twists and turns of this last year and expect them again. And I think for us, getting a chance to document some of these things and being a part of sports and covering sports, there to me, there's no greater job because you never know. You never know what's going to happen on any given day.
Spontaneity. I'm a big fan of it. I'm working in the right place, getting to cover the NBA, getting to cover the Brooklyn Nets, and I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you, everybody, Nets fans. I hope you had a great 2024. Have a great 2025. Thank you for listening to the Backcourt, presented by Ticketmaster, a Brooklyn Nets podcast of which I am very happy to be a part of. We will see you in a week. Thanks for listening. Rate, subscribe, like, all that stuff. Stay safe out there.